Hey, this is Mark Pattison back again with another great episode of Finding Your Summit. And this week, I'm so stoked because we've got just a rock star of a guest on. Not that all the other ones aren't, but this guy has talked about achievement. Man, his name is Rich Barton. And Rich Barton is the founder of Expedia. I'm sure nobody's ever heard that. And also the founder of Zillow, another one that's gone crazy. In addition to all that, he's on the board of Netflix and Artsy and Nextdoor and a bunch of other ones. And just what a spectacular life this guy has had. And of course, his adversity, so to speak, it's all relevant to who you're talking to and what their situation is. But certainly building these different companies, it's not easy. But he did it and he has done it. He continues to do it. And it was just very fun to talk with him. Very engaging, very warm guy, very smart. And bottom line is I learned a lot and I just get really jacked up talking to these types of guys. So Rich Barton is on the pod in a few minutes. And as always, go in, rate and review. If you want to find out any more info on what I'm up to, you can go to markpattisonnfl.com. And again, we appreciate the love with going into iTunes, and it really helps out in terms of overall exposure. So with that, let's get on to Rich. It's awesome, and here we go. Hey, everybody, it's Mark Pattison back again with another epic episode of Finding Your Summit. And this week, I'm very privileged to have a guy I met this last summer at our common buddy's house, Tom Owens. His name is Rich Barton. And I am beaming today from Park City, Utah, all the way up to Seattle, Washington, where Rich is hanging out, I'm sure, at his office. Rich, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, that's great. I was really intrigued. And for those who don't know who Rich is had quite a resume in terms of accomplishment in the past. He, former Microsoft guy, founder of Expedia, founder of Zillow, on the board of many companies, Netflix, to name a few. And we'll get into that stuff in just a bit. But now, let's start back, Rich, with I want to try to track and trace where this whole entrepreneurial spirit came on your end. And so you grew up on the East Coast, I believe, right?
I did. I went to high school in Connecticut outside of New York City, kind of a New York City suburb.
Yeah. And so, like, growing up, were you doing odds and end jobs? Were you the guy coming up with some, I don't know, popcorn stand that you wanted to, blow out and franchise? Or, I mean, where did that thing kick in?
Yeah, I guess I was always focused on work and businesses. Yeah, I was, I started caddying before I was legal to work. And then I was the ice cream man driving the ice cream truck around the neighborhood. And I waited tables. I did a lot of jobs. And then finally, when I was in college, I started a exterior house painting company and had my own painting company. And I kind of knew doing that, I knew that I didn't want to go work for another, like College Pro Painters was the kind of franchised operation in the area. And I knew I didn't want somebody else making a bunch of money off my sweat, and I figured I could do it myself. So I guess at that point, I pretty much knew I had the entrepreneurial bug.
That's great. And did you have any mentors? I mean, from the standpoint of paving the way, I mean, certainly my grandfather was a big mentor for me. He owned restaurants and hotels in Seattle and really kind of paved the way for me, the kind of the vision board of where I wanted to go in my life. But was that present in your life, or did you pick that up from other people along the way?
My family was really not full of entrepreneurs. My dad was a really successful kind of man in the gray suit and briefcase riding the train to a big corporate job guy, kind of guy out of the 50s and 60s. Super successful at that. And he and my mother both set a fine example of a work ethic and the importance of family. But I wouldn't say I had, in my family at least, I didn't have an entrepreneurial mentor. I was just kind of in a closeted way, kind of a rebellious kid. I was a pretty good kid. I didn't get in too much trouble, but I just didn't like to, I think I thought I was smarter than most people, and I didn't like people telling me what to do. And I think I kind of wanted to stick it to the man.
I love that. Just kind of a renegade out there. I'm going to do it my way or the highway. No, it's great.
In a very constrained New Canaan, Connecticut kind of way. I mean, it was the playground that I was playing in. It was not a place, luckily for me, that I could get in too much trouble, which was a huge advantage for me relative to a lot of young people, right? I mean, if you're born the wrong color or the wrong place, you don't have that safe place to explore rebelliousness,
Yeah, no, I do appreciate that. The more I travel around the world, the more I see that beyond just the U.S. So, okay, so now you do your formative years in on the East Coast in Connecticut, and then you get admitted into Stanford. So what choices did you have in terms of, pursuing your collegiate career?
Well, I had some choices. I had gotten into some other schools early on the East Coast, and the Stanford application was just kind of I'd never been out there. I'd never seen it. I did think I wanted to be an engineer, though, and I knew it was a great engineering school. So I applied. And my parents said, look, if you get in, then we'll buy a ticket for you to go take a look at it. And I got in, and I went and took a look at it, and it was like 2 feet of snow in Connecticut and freezing, and the same at the other schools that I was looking at. And I went out to Stanford, and there were like women and kids playing volleyball in the middle of campus. And I walked around, and I remember thinking, wow, this is a little bit different world here. And it was something that was exciting to me.
Yeah, and Stanford's such a great spot. I travel with the UCLA football team and serving a mentorship for them. And just so you're up there every 2 years, and that campus is spread out. I played there a number of different times way back in the day. You just feel like your IQ point just jumps up a few notches, when you stand on the campus.
So, Mark, did you go to UCLA after growing up in Seattle?
No, I actually went to the University of Washington. So,
okay.
Yep.
So I was going to riff on saying, for me at least, I think part of my I don't know, rebellious is really the right word. It's probably not. But I was definitely seeking new lands to explore. And for me, getting far away from everything I knew and putting myself in a totally different situation and seeing how I did seemed exciting to me. I was drawn to that. Some people aren't really drawn to that. I bet a lot of your podcast listeners here, based on what you've done in your life and what you like to talk about, are in fact drawn to that. And that's definitely me.
Yeah, no, I love that. So what is it about Stanford? There's been, the guys that go to Stanford, obviously you have to have a high IQ to get in or pass all the different tests. But I don't know, it seems like there's just been so many incredible companies, born out of the Stanford historic past, right? So what is it? Is there something different about that to other schools across the states? Do they breed that? Is there a community that you guys are involved with that you just mind share?
Yeah, I think a lot of people know this, but Stanford is kind of I would call it the beating heart of the Silicon Valley entrepreneurial tech ecosystem. Okay, and it goes way back. It goes back to HP and Intel and Fairchild Semiconductor, and then goes right through young founders who were students who founded Yahoo and Google. And my co-founder of Zillow Group, Lloyd Frank, was with me at Stanford, and the guy Peter Thiel who did PayPal and several others was in my class at Stanford. And Reid Hoffman was in my class at Stanford. He founded LinkedIn.
Yep.
Anyway, so it would be easy to look at that correlation and say, oh, well, it must be because of Stanford that this is happening. And I certainly give credit to Stanford, but it's more this ecosystem and this network of people and money and talent that all mix together in a way that reinforce each other, that creates, what it does is it creates this fertile soil where startups can grow and thrive. And it's a feedback system so that the more growth and thriving and death and composting that happens, the more growth material there is there. So it just keeps getting better down there. It's really, I can't imagine what would stop that from going, but I would say poor public policy and poor government actually could end up breaking that cycle of success. Here in Seattle, place well, we're doing really well at creating an ecosystem that's much younger but growing along the same path in the same way with some incredible companies that have been founded here in Seattle, like Amazon and Microsoft and Expedia and Zillow and many others.
Starbucks, yeah. I always call Seattle the center of the universe, and people always chuckle, and I throw those names around, and they have a hard time competing with other companies who have done the same thing in a different city.
Yeah, on a per capita basis, this must be the most kind of business successful city in the country, if not the world, really. Costco as well. Boeing. It's really quite a phenomenal entrepreneur's story out here, and maybe it has something to do with the fact that we're in the northwest corner of the country, kind of on the frontier, and it's a bunch of frontiers people that settled out here.
Yeah, no, I love it. So as you were navigating your way through college, did you have a plan that I want to become this? Or were you just going through and you're going to take it as it approached? Your senior year, you graduate, and then off you go.
Well, I wasn't playing football at Stanford, so I wasn't your size, although that would have been fun. As I said before, my dad was an engineer. He was a mechanical engineer at Duke. I always idolized my dad. I still do, knocking wood. And so I kind of figured I wanted to be an engineer, and I was good at the engineering kinds of things. And so while I knew I wanted to get an engineering degree, on the one hand, I also knew I wanted to have my own business on the other. I kind of had that suspicion, as I said before. And so I kind of went into school with a plan to get an engineering degree, but to get one and take other classes that enabled me to learn about what it would take to be my own entrepreneur as well. And so in hindsight, it sounds crystal clear, right? Our paths seem very well thought out in hindsight. It's certainly not that well thought out while you're going through it, but I did have a loose plan to put those two sets of tools in my toolbox in college.
That's awesome. So then in 1991, you began working for Microsoft. So I assume you were recruited, as many people were back in the day, and you were brought up there. And what group did you start working for?
I was product manager of MS-DOS 5.
Okay, that's a word like a dinosaur, right?
There will be a small percentage of your listeners who even know what that product is. It's an operating system product. And it was an interesting one for the main reason that it was the first time Microsoft decided to sell a retail upgrade of the operating system. I'm not sure that means anything to you, but maybe it does. Basically, before that, anytime a new operating system came out, you had to buy a new computer to get it. Or you had to tear down all the software on your computer, try to install the new operating system yourself, and then rebuild the whole thing, and which wasn't really very workable. And so we figured, hey, there are enough computers out there now running the last version of DOS. If we can get even 10% of them to buy a upgrade for $50, we'd have the biggest retail software product of all time, because there's so many computers out there. And so that was the strategy going into the DOS 5 upgrade. And it worked out even better than we anticipated. It was by far the biggest selling retail piece of software of all time, probably by a factor of 5 or 10 when we released it in 1991.
So how did the whole Expedia thing come up within Microsoft? A lot of people don't know the story from the standpoint of it was literally born out inside the structure of Microsoft. It wasn't something they incubated on the outside and Gates funded or something. This was actually a Microsoft company. So where did you come up with the initiative to approach Bill Gates and the others about this idea of doing the travel online?
Okay, so at this point, this is probably 1994 now, okay? And I had changed groups from the operating systems groups over to the consumer division, so I was working on consumer-oriented software products. You might remember Encarta. It was a multimedia CD-ROM encyclopedia.
My brother-in-law, Bill Smith, worked on the Encarta group many years ago.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I know Bill.
Yeah, brother-in-law.
Okay, wow. All right, so you do know what it is. And Encarta kind of put Encyclopedia Britannica out of business, and then Wikipedia later put Encarta out of business. And there is a great example of technology disruption right there. But anyway, this was back in the day when Encarta-like things were happening. And I was in the consumer division, and I became quite enamored of the internet. The World Wide Web hadn't happened yet, so there was no Netscape, there was no Mosaic, there wasn't any web browsing, but the internet did exist as a communication protocol. And there were interesting things happening on the internet in the form of online services. Some of your listeners may remember AOL and CompuServe and Prodigy.
Yep.
Okay, so that's kind of the environment I was in. I was pretty fascinated by the internet. I thought the internet was more interesting than the computer. I saw the computer as a productivity device, and I saw the internet as a potentially life-changing entertainment and kind of a practical, almost shopping tool.
I think you're right.
Yeah. Well, it's obvious in hindsight, and it actually was pretty obvious at the time too, honestly. Anybody who used AOL could actually figure out that this connectivity thing was going to change everything. And I was part of that, and there were not a lot of us kind of into this thing at that point. But one of the ideas in the consumer division was to do an Encarta version, like a travel guide version of Encarta. So imagine a whole library of travel guides.
Yep.
CD-ROMs, multimedia CD-ROMs. Wow, how cool would that be? And I was put in charge, amongst other projects, of that project. And as I looked at it, I was like, well, this could kind of be cool, but I don't think we could sell many of them because travel guides are most useful when you're traveling, and there were no smartphones then. You weren't going to tote around your multimedia CD-ROM when you're in Paris and break it out and figure out what to do and where to go in Paris, right?
Yep.
It's just impractical. But I did think that an internet-connected device to help you plan and purchase travel was really interesting. You remember this because we're about the same age. Mm-hmm. And before Expedia came along, booking an airline ticket and finding a hotel was a really, really painful process.
Called your travel agent.
You wrote down stuff. You heard the keyboard clicking. You knew she was using a computer, right? And I remember I was a busy business traveler, and I remember thinking maybe I'm a little control-oriented, but I remember wanting to kind of jump through the phone, turn the screen my way, and do it myself. I knew I could do a better job. And that frustration, like so many entrepreneurs, it's kind of the idea stemmed from frustration, some real world experience that frustrated you. And that was my frustration. I wanted control. I wanted to see everything myself. And I knew that in a connected world where everybody had a PC connected to the internet, that regular people were going to be able to do that and take that control. And so that was the genesis. The first product review I had for this travel version of Encarta, I had it with Bill Gates. The company was still pretty small at the time. And I went into the regular annual product review and I said, look, Bill, I know that you really like Encarta and you really like this travel guide idea. I know it's something you're interested in, but it's a tiny business. It's a stupid business. And however, what we can do is actually, if we connect people to travel booking, we could build the largest seller of travel in the world, if you let me. And that's how he said yes. And that's how Expedia started.
What was that like pitching Bill?
I guess it was intimidating. I was pretty young. I was 25 or 26. And I'm sure I was intimidated. But the company, when I arrived at the company, it had maybe 3,000 people. So I had enough exposure to Bill and Steve and the senior leadership at Microsoft that I didn't lack for confidence either, I guess. But I'd had enough exposure to be comfortable. So I wasn't nervous to the point where I couldn't speak. But I'm sure it was stressful. And I was pitching what I thought was a big idea. Luckily, he thought it too. I tried the logic. I did want to have my own company. And so I did actually try to talk him into funding me on the outside, arguing that it wasn't really going to be a Microsoft software business. It was going to be a travel business. And he understood that logic and he saw some merit to it. But he thought, well, why don't you, he said, well, just start it inside the company. And if it makes sense, we'll think about spinning it out.
Yeah. So that must have been a fun ride to actually take that ideation and go pitch it. They're behind you. There's not that many companies. It seemed like in those days that they were rolling out big companies within the company, right? And like you said, it didn't follow the exact, structure of what Microsoft is all about.
It didn't. It was a little different. And, now when I talk about it to business school classes, I call it intrapreneuring, being an entrepreneur in a big company.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people are sitting inside of big companies and frustrated way, kind of crushed by the bureaucracy, feeling like they're not supported and they can't do anything and wanting to start their own thing. And my argument is you can do it right where you are. You can hoist the pirate flag a little bit. No need to be obnoxious, but have a big idea, draw a team of really good people to you, and make it happen inside.
Another guy, a co-worker with you, partner in crime, Richard Bangs, is a guy I had on earlier podcast. Just a great guy, right? And he's really turned a travel career with all of his videos and...
Yeah, and he founded Mountain Travel Soba. He's one of the first, in my life, kind of the first real adventurer that I met face to face. He's a terrific guy.
Yeah, just total pioneer going down, hundreds of uncharted territories of river rafting, right?
Yeah.
So you take Expedia, you blow it up, it goes public, you spin it out, and you are the CEO of Expedia for a number of years, and then you decide to step away. Why was that?
Well, it was a transaction situation. So, yes, we grew Expedia inside of Microsoft, and it was pretty successful, though the web was small. And my last couple of years there, I worked for Steve Ballmer directly, and I asked him for $100 million to spend on TV advertising. This was in 1999. And I don't think Microsoft Corporation as a whole spent $100 million in TV advertising. And he said, well, we don't do that. Get out of here. And I said, well, maybe we should spin it out because the whole world is going public. This is 1999. Pets.com went public in 1999. And I'm like, we can spin this out. We can take it public because the public markets will give me $100 million. And he's like, all right, let's give it a shot. So Steve and Bill and Greg Maffei, who was CFO at the time, were super supportive of me doing that. And that was fun. That was quite an experience. I was 32 years old. We had a team of 150 people, and we carved it out of Microsoft and did an IPO, and we moved out. The television advertising and the grander marketing plan worked really well against a better product, and we kept growing. We went from kind of half the size of the number one player to twice the size within 18 months. That worked out well. And then there came a time when, because we were a public company, if somebody wants to come and buy you, you have to listen. And so we had a very well-known media mogul named Barry Diller, who had a big interactive media company called IAC, Interactive Corp. And in 2002 or 2003, he made a huge offer to buy the company. And it was an offer that, as a public company, we couldn't say no to. And so at that point, we went private and were purchased by IAC. And that was when I decided to move on and do some other things.
So at that point, did you take, I'm putting words into, I guess, your mouth, but did you take a year sabbatical?
I did. I took a year off. And my wife, she's an OBGYN, and she had to clean up her patient backlog, and we took a sabbatical. We moved our 3 little kids and ourselves to Italy for a year.
What was that like?
Super fun.
Of course it is. What part of Italy did you go to?
We lived in Florence. Those people know how to live. They really do. They've got their priorities right.
Just a great art community as well.
Art, food, and cycling, and just our mutual friend Tom Owens, he talks about the culture of the table incessantly at times. I believe it, and that they've got that right.
Yeah, no question about that. Okay, so you take a year off, and now it's time to get back to reality, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so
I was hoping to find my inner artist or poet or sculptor. I learned. It was a good learning experience. I did all those things. I took art class. I took up road biking and met a bunch of Italian guys. It was fun. But I did discover that I derive a lot of jollies from creating companies and businesses and running them.
Yeah, I'll tell you something from my standpoint. I saw this happen with my grandfather in particular, and he was the one that was very entrepreneurial, but I will never, ever, ever retire. And if people want to retire, that's cool. But just for me, it just keeps the motor going. It keeps the brain fresh. It keeps you energized. It gets you a reason to get out of bed every morning. And so retirement sounds great, but once you kind of head in that direction, not saying that you were retired, but you just want to get things going again, and you're still young, you've got a lot of ideas. And is this where the idea of Zillow came up?
That's right. Yeah. I totally agree with you. I don't necessarily put it in terms of retiring, but I think the key to the happiness equation is something to do, someone to love, and something to hope for. And the something to do is any one of those 3 legs of the happiness equation, any one of them's not working, you're not happy. So working for me is something to do, and I personally really enjoy it. But yeah, so it was in that time. We moved, my wife's dad had some health issues, and we moved back to the States, and we happened to be shopping for a new house because we were moving back, and our family had grown. It was during that shopping for a new house experience that I had another one of these kind of, in hindsight, very obvious head-slapping experiences, being very frustrated trying to find basic information about shopping for a home. What are the past transactions? What are the comparables? What are the pictures? What's the address? What's the listing? What's the price? The year was probably 2004 or 2005. The web had been around for 10 years at that point, and I couldn't believe that the web hadn't democratized access to information about real estate. And so my partner, Lloyd Frink, and he was in the same situation. He was post-Expedia and shopping for a home. And we were sharing an office, and we had this experience together, and we were like, this has got to change. And that's where Zillow was born. Yeah, no, it's incredible. And so many of the great ideas are the ideas that just have fine-tuned improvement, right? So you didn't invent the real estate market, obviously. And I guess if you went to a real estate office, you could get a lot of that information. But again, going back to getting it on a grand scale, you could be researching in Sun Valley, Idaho to, someplace in Florence to Seattle, right? And you can get that real-time info of exactly comps and what houses are for sale and everything else. And it's right under your nose. And so you guys just did the obvious and expose it. Brilliant. Yep. Power to the people, we call that. Turn on the lights in the room. Yeah, no, that's what happened. Another common buddy of ours, Jort Vandermeulen, I know went to work for you during those early days. So great guy, by the way. So the name of this podcast is called Finding Your Summit, and I think it's relative to everybody's situation. And some people, I've talked to, they've no arms and legs and climbed up these crazy mountains, and there's obviously a lot of adversity they've had to come over. I think there's also another segment in terms of taking a company from zero to just the idea
How are you going to fund it? Moving people through, human resources, all the things that play into it. And there's one thing I found that I think you came up with, which just really falls in line with what I think we're talking about today, which is you came up with this quote called, "To create a great environment where failing to achieve is okay." Right? Whether you came up with that or not, I'm going to claim that was yours. And I assume that you would endorse that. But there's just so many companies that have people running scared, going in a different direction if they're not aligned with the CEO all the way down in terms of the way they view the world to make that company great.
And as you were speaking, I'm thinking I've always been into sports myself, but my kids are athletes. A couple of my kids are good athletes. And I have a senior in high school, Will, who is a soccer player. And I think the same holds for a coach and a team with players. Like if there's a coach, which Will had a coach a couple of years ago, who was so imposing and so kind of fear-inducing that the kids were kind of afraid to be creative and they were afraid to fail. And when the players are afraid to fail, they're not being creative. They're not trying new things. They're not taking chances because they think they're going to get pulled off and yelled at or whatever. And I think that same thing holds in business. As soon as he got a coach that let him be creative, he really blossomed. And I feel that same way about growing a company.
I totally agree. So fail to win, right? In the context of what you're talking about. I had a high school coach when I was playing football at Roosevelt in Seattle, and he just basically let me go do whatever I wanted to do within the structure of stay within the lines, but you can do whatever you want within those lines. And it just gives you all the confidence in the world. And as you're saying, if you screw up or whatever, you're not going to get yanked. And it just, over time, it just breeds confidence. And I've always said, make your weakest link the strongest and you'll have a strong team. You can't go unless everybody's pulling, and you need to give confidence to everybody on that team. And that's a great way to do it. And there's not too many coaches who get that because the outcome of winning is too important beyond the development of the individual.
I think you're right. And I actually think our coach here in Seattle, Pete Carroll of the Seahawks, is a great example of a guy who's fostered a very collegial, supportive. These guys want to play for him. He may not be the smartest coach. He may not, have the most talented individual players. He may not. But these guys, they're a team and they're creative and they have their own personalities and the coach supports that. I love that.
Yeah. There's another acronym that I found that I think you invented. And by the way, I'm going to credit you too with the inventor, the founder of the happiness factor, the 3 factors that you mentioned. I love that. I'm in internal search for happiness and what that means. But there's another one acronym that you came up with called BHAG. Let's talk about that.
I didn't invent that one. A guy named Jim Collins who wrote Good to Great.
Great book.
Yeah, a big, hairy, audacious goal. I mean, I think nobody ever achieved greatness by aiming low. You got to aim high in order to achieve great things. And I believe that big, hairy, audacious goals in many instances are self-fulfilling. JFK, 1961. My dream is to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth within this decade. Okay, at the time he issued that challenge to the country, it was a ludicrous notion. It was audacious. It was nutty. And that was the initial reaction. And then the next day and the next week and the next month, smart people around the country sat down and they thought, well, maybe if we were going to try to do that, what would we have to do in order to make that real? And then some people started to believe that it could be done. And then the very best people in the country who could come work on this were attracted to this big, hairy, audacious goal. And in fact, it happened. And it happened 2 years before the end of the decade. So these things are somewhat self-fulfilling. I think we're getting a little bit of that with this guy, Elon Musk, who is just an unbelievably inspirational guy who says we're going to colonize Mars by 2050. We're going to have a giant colony on Mars by 2050. We're going to have these 3 football field-sized rockets full of people in gear that we're sending up regularly to Mars. Is that ludicrous? I don't know. It sounds crazy to me, but a lot of people are beginning to believe it's possible, and there are a huge number of people working on it now. Anyway, in business, this is the same thing. Same thing. With Expedia, we said we wanted to be the largest seller of travel in the world by helping everyone everywhere make and take better trips. And when I said that, when we founded Expedia, it was ludicrous because we were just this tiny little nothing inside of Microsoft, and the travel industry was huge. Well, actually, today, Expedia is the largest seller of travel in the world. These things happen. They can happen. I tell people to take big swings, set big goals. Dare to set big goals.
So how do you bring that down? So that's like a mission statement almost, right? We're going to become the largest online travel retailer in the world. So how do you break that down to your individual employees?
Well, I mean, communicating something that captures their imagination and gets their heart pumping is enough. That's what you have to do, right? As you're attracting people to your expedition, climbing a mountain or building a company or putting a man on the moon. If you have something that's inspirational, can you close your eyes? We're going to stand on the top of K2. We're going to hoist that flag and we're going to be there. We're going to capture that moment and it's going to feel, can you imagine what it's going to feel like? People can close their eyes and they can imagine that. And then you get great people on your journey. And so all that you need to do is to paint a beautiful, good dream. And in my case, I really like these business dreams that have to do with empowering the little guy. They are storming the Bastille kinds of business ideas, where it's giving people like my mom and my sisters and our friends the power to do something they couldn't have done before, be it in real estate or in travel, or I've got a job startup called Glassdoor that it's the same kind of transparency play in the jobs market, and then others. People say, yeah, that's good. Regular people should have that information. They should be in charge. They should be able to make those decisions themselves. And they get motivated and inspired by that. And that draws great people to the program, and then great people figure it out.
Where do you find time with running the CEO of Zillow?
I'm not CEO of Zillow anymore. I was for the first 5 or 6 years.
Oh, you're not? Okay.
But since we went public, a really awesome guy who was with me at Expedia and was the entrepreneur of Hotwire. He's been CEO since just before we went public. So I'm the executive chairman.
Okay, so point's still the same. You're also the founder of another company called Trover, which was acquired by Expedia. So I'm sure you're not as involved in that company, but venture partner in Benchmark and board of directors of Netflix and Real Self and Nextdoor and Artsy and a bunch of stuff. So how do you divide your attention in terms of giving these different companies value?
Well, I would say about half my time in my office is inside of Zillow Group, which has become a big public company now and doing really well. And so that's about half my time. And the rest is divided amongst those companies you mentioned and a couple others. And I'm on the board. I'm not running any of these other companies. I'm a board director and an investor. And I would say that my role at this point in my career, and probably has been for a while, is that I'm the coach. So I work with CEOs and the leaders of these companies on the stuff that is important to the company and important to them. And I help them coach them through, when they need help.
Love that. Coach Barton. Love that.
That's
all
it.
The way. So the last thing I found that was pretty interesting, you were appointed, and I'm just asking what this means actually. You were appointed on the Barack Obama Presidential Ambassadors Global Entrepreneurship board or group, or I'm not sure what that was, but how did that all happen?
Penny Pritzker, who was the Secretary of Commerce, approached me in the Obama administration during the second term. She approached me and a few other entrepreneurs and asked us if we would help represent the United States in developing parts of the world that were just kind of at the beginning of building entrepreneurial economies. And there was a little bit of a focus on trying to export American-style capitalism to poorer and maybe some Muslim countries. Okay? So there was a bit of a policy agenda that underlay it. But the vision was that kind of the tech entrepreneur could be the tip of the freedom spear. Okay? And that's kind of a grand way of putting it. But so a group of us said yes, and we got involved with that. And we would go different places in the world and give speeches and meet with people and get entrepreneurs fired up and talk about what it takes to build an ecosystem like we have here in Seattle to build startups. It was a few years that I did that. It was a really fun few years. But the program, as the new administration came in, the program was ended.
At any rate, I mean, It sounds pretty cool to say you're, appointed by the president.
It sounds grander than it was. It wasn't a huge chunk of my time, but I did give a few speeches, and I had a lot of fun with it.
So finally, what's the next big idea? Do you have that brewing right now, or you're just kind of sitting tight with, as you kind of sit over as the mother bird, the coach over all these companies that you're invested in?
So in my flock is companies of all different sizes, from, I guess, Netflix is the biggest, where I've been on the board for maybe 15 years, to much smaller startups. A more recent one that I've become heavily involved with is called Artsy. It's in New York City, and we're building a digital marketplace for fine art globally. And so every couple of years, I'll add something new to the mix, whether or not I start it or it's an entrepreneur that I found and put some money behind. It depends. Probably it's more the latter these days. But I wouldn't be surprised if something else, my ever-expanding group of creative people doesn't come up with something new.
Yeah, that's great. Well, listen, I'm very grateful to our common buddy, Thomas Owens, for putting us together at that night this last summer. It was fun to get caught up with you and some of the other guys that were at the table that night, and wish you all the best of luck into the future. Your career has been amazing, and you've worked at it. So like all these things, don't just wake up and like, hey, all these great things happen. You got to put the hard work in, and you've done that. So congratulations to you.
Thanks a lot, Mark.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. And go Seahawks. Hey, and thank you so much for listening to the Find Your Summit podcast. We are so glad to have you along for this journey. And if you enjoy the show, please tell a friend, share it on iTunes, spread it to the planet. We're looking to broadcast this to every person that is out there because, as you know, everybody has their own summit that they're going after. If you're looking to follow my journey, you can find that through my social links on markpattisonnfl.com. That's Mark, M-A-R-K, Pattison, P-A-T-T-I-S-O-N, NFL.com. So, until the next podcast, just remember, clear eyes, full hearts, and remember, it takes a little more to make a champion, so make it happen. Thank you. Bye.